Badass of the Week is an iHeartRadio podcast produced by High Five Content. April 25th, 1915. From a fortified position above the Gallipoli Peninsula, atop the shores of Cape Helles, the men of the Ottoman Empire's 57th Regiment can see the enemy approaching. The once tranquil blue waters are littered with the gray hulls of steel warships, their thunderous cannons aimed at the ridgeline. The pristine white sand beaches are swarming with enemy troops, clamoring from landing craft, streaming up the slopes as far as the eye can see in either direction. The 57th Regiment is exhausted. They're outnumbered, they're surrounded, and now they're almost entirely out of ammunition. But this is their homeland. They aren't going to give it up without a fight. Their commander surveys the scene. He wears a khaki uniform, a steel helmet, a serious-looking mustache, and the rank insignia of a lieutenant colonel. He is a man from a different time, a warrior who would have fit in as well leading Sipahi horsemen into battle on the steppes as he does commanding the exhausted riflemen in this trench before him. He gathers his surviving soldiers. Anyone able to stand rises and draws close. He looks at them solemnly, surveys their faces. Each of these men is dear to him. Each of their deaths will be meaningful. He orders them to fix bayonets. Lieutenant Colonel Mustafa Kemal knows that reinforcements won't arrive in time to save his men. But maybe their sacrifice can buy the army some time. I am not ordering you to attack, he says to his men, drawing a long curved sword from the scabbard at his hip. I am ordering you to die. Then he climbs from the safety of his dugout, points his blade at the enemy, and charges. His men follow with him. Hello, and welcome back to Badass of the Week. My name is Ben Thompson, and I am here, as always, with my co-host, Dr. Pat Larish. Pat, how are you doing today?
I'm doing okay, Ben, and I'm excited to be here with our badass listeners.
Yes, and we're excited to talk about somebody who is very central to a country that has recently changed its name, and I'm going to try very intensely to use the correct name of the country, but I'm not entirely certain on the pronunciation yet. So it's Turkiye, right?
Yeah, it's Turkiye. So it used to be spelled turkey, like the Thanksgiving bird, and it's actually Turkiye. T-U with what looks like an umlaut. I think they probably have a different name for it. K-I-Y-E. And just call it Turkiye, like turkey with a ya at the end.
Turkiye. I think I can manage this. Yeah. The umlauts are like a little intimidating.
They're just little Turkiye.
Okay. Well, I will endeavor to use Turkiye. I will endeavor to use Turkiye. So Turkiye is having a big year. They are celebrating their 100th year as a republic. October 29th,
Woo-hoo.
2023 was the 100th year as a republic. And I have written about many Turk heroes over my years of running Badass of the Week. And it's really fun to do that because I get a lot of great feedback from Turkish people who love it when I write about the Turks. Like for me, the Turks and the Polish, they're always happy when I write about their countries because they're two countries with these really great military traditions, these badass heroes, these that dominated Europe. Both these countries were dominant super military powers, yet they always kind of get a bad rap today, and they don't get talked about as these military powers that they traditionally have been.
Yeah. And with the Ottomans, especially with the episodes that we've done to date on our podcast, it's not so much that they're losing necessarily, but that in the stories that we choose to tell, they're presented as the bad guys, or at least the antagonists. You know, we have Vlad the Impaler going against the Ottoman Empire. We have Laskarina Bubalina going against the Ottoman Empire. But what are things like from the point of view of the Turks? We've got a rich civilization. Surely we must have a badass or two in there somewhere, obviously.
Yeah, exactly, right? The thing I like to talk about with the Turks is that the national hero of every country in Eastern Europe is the national hero of that country because he defeated the Turks, you know? Mm-hmm. So like there's got to be something happening here on the other side. Let's talk about some badass Turks. And they have great names. That's the thing I love about Turkish heroes is they have these great epithets, right? Vlad the Impaler is cool, but they have Selim the Grim, Bayezid the Thunderbolt, Mehmed the Conqueror, Suleiman the Magnificent. You have all these awesome, you know, epithets that you're like, all right, Selim the Grim, I'm in. Like, what? He's badass already. I don't even know anything about the guy, but I can picture him and he's badass. But then every time I post a story about a Turkish hero, or I would, you know, but then when I would post these stories of these Turkish heroes, every time I would write the article, I would get a lot of email from these from people in Turkiye, and they would say, hey, you know, this guy's great. Thanks for writing about him. Thanks for, you know, making us sound good for once, because there's not a lot of that in the West. But you're missing like the biggest badass in our country's history. So we gotta talk about this guy. Yeah,
we definitely do. Yep. So let's do it. Who is the Turk of all Turks?
Yes, the Turk of all Turks, the father of all Turks, the national hero of Turkey.
Not literally.
Not literally, no. They actually existed as people before him, however, not in their current form.
But like metaphorically, figuratively, symbolically, the father of Turks.
Yes, yeah, and his name means that. What he is known as today is Ataturk, and that means the father of all Turks. He is a guy who is, you know, beloved by the people of Turkey and has been respected by the people he has fought against in war, generally. And
that takes a lot.
That takes a lot. It is a hard line to walk of like respected by your enemies and loved by your people. In fact, like in 1981, on the anniversary of Ataturk's death, the United Nations actually declared 1981 the Ataturk Year of the World as a testament to Ataturk's abilities to, quote, promote world peace, international understanding, and respect for human rights. It's actually illegal to insult him in public in Turkey. And yes, there's like probably some kind of fine associated with a beating, but you actually probably just get your ass kicked by the Turks who hear it and don't like you saying that.
Like you insulted my symbolic dad.
Yes. Yeah. Would you say about my mama? Like, I'm like,
yeah. So tell us about this guy.
Yeah. I'm gonna open with a quote about him. The quote is by a guy named Noel Barber, who was a British journalist and novelist, and he traveled to all these exotic countries. He reported from Morocco, where he was stabbed 5 times, apparently. He got shot in the head during the Hungarian Revolution. He got in a car accident later that year, then became a best-selling novelist while he was in his 70s. So I don't know.
Ooh, hey. Yeah. Okay, so I like the way you slid an extra bonus badass into our episode.
Yeah, no kidding. I had no idea.
Woo, okay.
Well, this guy would know.
So this badass, Noel Barber, is writing about Ataturk. What is badass knows badass? What does Noel Barber say about Ataturk?
So he says, a man born out of due season, an anachronism, a throwback to the Tatars of the steppes, a fierce elemental force of a man. With his military genius and his ruthless determination, in a different age, he might well have been a Genghis Khan conquering empires. And when you see this guy in pictures, that's what he looks like. He's even wearing the hat.
Yeah. Hats are important in this episode.
Yeah, there's going to be a whole bunch of stuff about hats in this episode. Anyway, stay tuned, and we'll be right back, and we'll get into it. All right, welcome back. We are going to talk about Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. So the story of Ataturk begins in 1881 with the birth of a kid named Mustafa. It might be kind of ironic now, but the future father of all Turks was born in what is now present-day Thessaloniki, Greece, though at the time it was called Salonika and it was part of the Ottoman Empire.
Yeah. The Turks liked to, or the Ottoman Empire liked to put their own names on places. And yeah, so Greece, as listeners who listened to our Lascarina Bubalina episode know, was part of the Ottoman Empire. And the Greeks were maybe a little salty about that. We've got a lot of stuff going on. And in 1881, Mustafa Kemal is born.
Mustafa, he goes to military school in Istanbul.
Not Constantinople.
Correct. So Mustafa goes to military school in Istanbul. He graduates as a lieutenant in 1905. And everybody kind of knew that this guy was going to be big time, even when he was at military school. His instructors nicknamed him Kemal, which is the Turkish word for perfection, which,
ooh,
yeah, it's a pretty big deal. I think. Wow. I don't think it's every day that your drill instructor calls you like Mustafa Perfection, right?
Yeah. I have to say, as a teacher, I have mixed feelings about this. Like, if I started nicknaming my students, I don't think it would go well for anyone involved. But anyway, but different time, different place, different mores. So yeah, so he gets named Kemal. He gets named Perfection, which is kind of nice.
Pretty good for him.
And I'm assuming this means that they think highly of him.
Yes. And so he joins a political party called the Young Turks. It's kind of so right now we are in the ending days of the Ottoman Empire. And the Young Turks, it's more than just a top 25 Rod Stewart song from the 80s. It is kind of a political party that is interested in reforming the Ottoman Empire. They had been sultans for hundreds of years, and they were looking, and it's not working out great for Turkey at the time, for the Ottoman Empire.
Yeah, Turkey kind of has a reputation in Europe as being, quote, the old man of Europe.
Yeah.
Which is kind of ageist, but letting you know that the standing of the Ottoman Empire is like,
Yeah, I mean, in 1905, people are using rifles and cannons and machine guns exist, and all of this stuff is happening, and the Turks are still, they still have a sultan. In a lot of ways, they're kind of still in this Middle Ages time period where they were this world power, very dominant world power, but they haven't kind of updated with the times, and these Young Turks are kind of this new generation of guys who are like, look, we aren't going to survive with the old way of things. The world has changed. The industrial revolution has happened. We need to catch up, or we're gonna get destroyed.
Yeah, get with the program.
And okay, great. Reform sounds good. Let's have democracy instead of a sultan and all of this stuff. But the Sultan doesn't like that. The Sultan tries to get Kemal dishonorably discharged and summarily executed for treason. But it doesn't happen because the Young Turks actually do end up gaining a lot of political power. And, they don't depose the Sultan, but they are able to gain enough power that they can protect their guys. Okay, great.
Yeah. I mean, I bet Mustafa Kemal's mom was relieved.
Yes. But the Ottoman Empire and the Young Turks are succeeding, but we're in kind of this, we end up in this little bit where the Young Turks are successful in beginning to change the way things are being done in the Ottoman Empire. But the Sultan is still there, and there's a lot of work to be done, and the progress is slow. And the rest of Europe is on a freight train to World War I.
Yeah, and like literally a freight train, because that's the technology we've got.
Right.
Yeah. So do you want to do a quick drive-by of the Ottoman Empire, the history thereof in context?
Yeah, let's do that. I think it's a good kind of setup here. Because the Ottoman Empire, they've been around at this point for 700 years. And it's been quite of a journey for them.
And Ottoman, I mean, some people, when they hear the word Ottoman, they think of a footstool, a nice poofy footstool that you put your feet up on after a long day. And
because I think they invented it, isn't that?
Yeah. I mean, furniture is important. This is important technology for humans. Anyway, so the Ottoman Empire was founded in 1299 by a guy called Osman, and Ottoman is just a bad European translation of his name. I think this is what happens when you have Italians trying to fit the name Osman into Italian. And the Ottomans are Turkic people from northwest Anatolia, which is the area that is now Turkey. They carved some land from the Byzantines, which was the Greek-speaking Eastern Roman Empire. And it grew into an empire that spanned the Middle East, North Africa, and even into Eastern Europe. If you walk around Vienna, you will find monuments and buildings that have some connection with the Turks. But by 1908, we've been an empire for over 600 years, and it takes a lot to maintain something. It wasn't quite what it used to be. And, like I said, it acquired the nickname, which is a really unfortunate nickname, the sick man of Europe. And sorry, I think earlier I said the old man of Europe, which is kind of awful.
Neither of them sounds great. Yeah.
Yeah, neither of them sounds great. Yeah. The sick man of Europe. And it's not intended as a compliment.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, okay, if you have a sick man, what do? You bring him chicken soup, you send him get well cards. That's not
if you're colonial Europe. You try to take Greece back. You try to retake Salonika and rename it Thessaloniki.
Yeah.
And that's what happens, right? The Ottoman Empire has been making life hard for Europe for 600 years, and now that the Ottomans are down, Europe is up. They are trying to take land back from the Ottomans. And the Ottoman Empire is now under attack from all sides by all of its enemies who are looking to grab land, grab wealth, and grab territory. So being a young lieutenant in early 1900s, Mustafa Kemal is in the middle of a lot of action pretty early on, right? In 1911, he ends up in Libya, where he's fighting against the Italians who are trying to take over Libya. And he's defending Tobruk, which is a fortress town, and he earns a name for himself. He earns a medal for bravery for leading 200 guys on a charge against a hugely larger force of Italians. He takes them around a flank, and they quote it as 200 guys against 2,000, but he does.
So it's like 1 to 10 odds.
Yeah. I mean, they always exaggerate this stuff when you do the battle report, but like whatever it was very brave. So he leads this charge out from Tobruk, gets into their trenches, captures a bunch of their weapons and equipment, and drives the Italians back. Yeah. A year later, he's fighting in the Balkans, and he's battling the Greeks, the Bulgarians, and the Serbians, who are all trying to retake their lands, or what they believe to be their lands, from the Ottoman Empire. We've talked about all the great heroes of Eastern Europe having fought the Turks, and it's because the Turks, they
took over.
Yeah, they started in Asia Minor and they ended up in Vienna and Warsaw, right? And all of that territory in between is now, like 24 countries, right? That kind of wanted those Turks out of there. And so Ataturk is traveling around and he's fighting in all of these places. He's battling in North Africa and Eastern Europe. And he is doing some pretty heavy lifting, leading troops on the front lines. He's in a lot of combat for 3 years of battle. So then World War I gets going in 1914. And the Ottoman Empire is brought into it on the side of Germany and Austria-Hungary and Italy, actually. So they're fighting against France and England and Russia. And you have this big world war. And, we've done a couple of World War I stories, and I'm sure we will do many more.
Oh, yeah.
But one thing that a lot of American listeners might not realize is that World War I was also fought in the Ottoman Empire, in present-day Turkiye. Fighting is kind of at a stalemate in France with the Germans, and the Germans are putting up a good fight. But the Ottoman Empire, they're the sick man of Europe. Maybe if we can attack into Turkiye, like we can wound these guys, we can knock them out of the fight, we can free up troops elsewhere.
Strategically, it sounds like a good plan.
Yeah, and it probably was. The problem is that they ran into Ataturk.
Ooh.
So
he was not named Ataturk yet, but he was still just, what was he, like colonel, lieutenant colonel?
Lieutenant colonel, which is lower than a colonel.
Okay. Yeah.
So he's not a high-ranking officer. He's had a lot of combat experience, and he's shown a lot of bravery, and he's been promoted.
Yeah.
But he's kind of military academy guy, worked his way up. He's a lieutenant colonel, which is kind of a mid-range officer. And he is stationed on the shores of a place called Gallipoli, which is
Gallipoli,
which is a military history buffs will recognize that name as one of the more famous, kind of bloodier battles from World War One. And he was just kind of positioned in the reserve. He was set out there on a reserve position. And Gallipoli was at a choke point in the Bosporus, so kind of entry to the Black Sea. And the
Bosporus, if you picture Istanbul on a map, the Bosporus is that little bit that connects Asia to Europe.
Yeah, the Bosporus is important because it connects Asia to Europe. It's access to the Mediterranean. It's the only access to the Mediterranean.
Yeah, it's a choke point, and sorry, I'm picturing it in my head, and it's right there. It's actually really thin in a way.
Yeah, super thin. That was the advantage of Constantinople, is that it held that position, right?
Yeah.
And so Mustafa Kemal is close to there, and the Turkish high command is not that good, right? The Sultan's guys, they're not that talented. They're not doing well in the war. They're getting beat in the Middle East by the Lawrence of Arabia guys. They're struggling financially and militarily, and the British Commonwealth sends 16 divisions of troops, mostly from Australia, New Zealand, and India, but also British as well. But these Commonwealth troops are going to land on Gallipoli, and they are going, and 16 divisions is a lot of troops, and they are going to try to cut the Turks off from access to the Mediterranean by taking this land. And the only guy there, the senior ranking officer at Gallipoli when these ships arrive, and he doesn't have very much notice that they're coming because, like I said, the logistics is not there for the Ottoman Empire. Is Mustafa Kemal, and he's got, a much, much smaller force, and he sees these guys coming, and he's like, all right, we got to dig in. We have to hold this. Otherwise, we're out of the war.
Yeah.
If we lose this battle, we lose the position, the war's over. We're not supposed to even we weren't supposed to be dealing with frontline attack, but now we have to.
Yeah, but here we are.
Yes. And so he very famously gets his guys together, and they're outnumbered by these guys. I mean, making an amphibious landing is very hard. They're up on the high ground in these mountains looking down onto this bay, and the British ships are coming in. The British Navy is coming in with troop transports full of Aussies and Kiwis, who are two pretty tough characters to deal with, and these Turks up on the mountain range, they're outnumbered, they're under-equipped, their technology is a step below the technology that the British Commonwealth can present. And Lieutenant Colonel Mustafa Kemal, he gets his guys together, and he says, all right, we're going to hold this position, we're going to dig in here, and we're going to fight. The quote that's attributed to him is, he says, I'm not ordering you to attack. I'm ordering you to die. We are going to fight here, and we're going to hold this line until somebody comes for us. But we aren't getting out of this, right? We're not going to see tomorrow. Wow. We got to stay here and fight these guys until somebody else gets over here. Because the Turks weren't ready for this. They were totally caught off guard.
Yeah.
And
that's hardcore.
It's hardcore. And he's like, we gotta, we can't give this up. So we'll just fight here until we die. And then that'll give some more time for our backup to come.
That's dedication.
Yes. So the battle begins, and Mustafa Kemal he's a lieutenant colonel. He's two steps below a general, right? But he is personally leading these counterattacks. He's the one shoot as much as you can. When you run out of bullets, fix your bayonets and attack. He is running up and down the line.
He's not asking his men to do anything that he wouldn't do himself.
No, he has no intention of surviving this battle. himself,
Yeah.
right? He is not leading from the back. He's not even a level of officer that would generally lead from the back in this situation either. So he is leading these guys. The British land on the Commonwealth troops land on the beach, and they're pushing their way up, and the Turks are shooting down at them with machine guns and artillery and rifles, but it's not enough. And the Commonwealth starts to get guys on the beach. They start to bring artillery up. They start to bring heavy guns up. The Gurkhas, who we are definitely going to talk about on this show in the future, but these guys are hardcore, right? They take over, like they charge up the hill and capture one of these Turkish positions on the ridgeline. Mustafa Kemal orders a group of guys to just kind of fix bayonets and counterattack them hand to hand, and was able to retake that high ground with basically a suicide charge. At one point, he was running around through the battle, and all there's gunfire and aircraft, and the British are shooting naval artillery from their warships and stuff, are pounding the Turkish positions. He's running around.
And it's not like the Turks have their own airplanes to respond with, right?
They do, but not enough, right? They're not what you'd need, right? They're under-equipped.
The odds are not in our favor here.
No. And so he's running around. At one point, he sees this group of this platoon is like falling back, and he's like, "Why are you guys falling back? We got to hold these positions." And they're like, "We don't have any bullets." And he's like, "Put your bayonet on your rifle and get back over there." And what happens is, like, it's one of at the time, it was the biggest amphibious assault ever undertaken. It's since been surpassed by D-Day, but at the time, nothing was bigger than this. And Ataturk is there, and he's holding the line, like, against all these odds. He's holding the line, and there's literally hundreds of thousands of Commonwealth troops trying to take this position that he's the commander of. And like you talked about leading from the front, his command headquarters was 300 yards from the front trenches, which is like 300 yards is not that far when you're talking about World War I artillery or mortars or any of that kind of thing. And instead of these guys fighting to the death, they hold it, and more troops show up, and the Ottomans are able to get reinforcements in there, and the battle ends up being a victory for the Ottoman Empire, thanks in no small part to Mustafa Kemal's leadership in those first hours and days and weeks.
Against really tough odds.
Yeah, and outnumbered by extremely well-equipped and very competent soldiers. So he gets promoted to colonel, of course. He gets transferred to the Caucasus, where this time he has to fight another defensive war, except this time he's not on the beach. He's in the mountains fighting Russians. And then after that, he gets transferred to Syria, into the desert, where he's fighting Lawrence of Arabia and some of these other guys in the sands of Arabia.
He's got range.
Yeah, he's got range. Like, he's been everywhere now. He's been fighting in Libya, Eastern Europe, on the beach, in Turkey, and everywhere. And he is able to hold the line against everything they threw against him.
So that's Mustafa Kemal and his military resume. How's that going for the Ottoman Empire in general?
Yeah, Germany's defeated, the Ottoman Empire is defeated, and there is this Treaty of Versailles that we talk about all the time whenever we want to bring up World War II stuff. And the Ottoman Empire is named in the Versailles Treaty, and it's hard. It's hard on the Turks. It's extremely harsh on the Turks, and a lot of that territory that the Serbians and the Greeks and all those other people wanted back, the Ottoman Empire has to give it up in this treaty.
But that's not the end of our story.
It's not the end of our story. It's kind of the beginning of the story, right?
Yeah.
So
should we take a break and tell the rest of the story after a word from our sponsor?
We are at the end of World War I, and Mustafa Kemal has been this great hero of the Ottoman Empire, this great warrior, this leader of military forces who has won every battle he's fought in and done so heroically against impossible odds. Yet his country still lost. And now he's here with, all of these very heavy penalties being levied against the Ottoman Empire in this Treaty of Versailles that ends World War I. and that's hard for him. And on top of that, he was a member of these Young Turks who kind of are trying to reject the old way of doing things anyway, right? He doesn't like his bosses and his superiors and his government, and they've done nothing to support him, and now they've signed this lame treaty that gives up all of this territory. There's Greek troops marching through Istanbul. There's probably some talk of it being renamed Constantinople, right? This is unacceptable.
Probably, yeah.
So Mustafa Kemal decides he's not going to take it. He's not going to abide by the terms of this treaty, which just seems kind of crazy, right? It seems really...
It's a treaty, come on.
It's a treaty, right? Like, you lost the war, we got to do this. But he's not happy with this. And so he leaves Istanbul in a boat, and he crosses the Black Sea, and he lands in Ankara, the city of Ankara, and declares an open revolt against the foreign powers occupying his homeland. He's a colonel. He's still not even a general, but he lands there and he says, I'm not going to take this. I'm going to fight. I'm going to reopen this war. And who's with me? And it turns out there's a lot of people that was with him. And if you ever wonder why Istanbul is not the capital of Turkey right now, this is why. It's because Mustafa Kemal left because he was mad and he sailed here and he built a new capital here.
Yeah. And Ankara, it's no slouch. It's been inhabited for millennia. It's going back to well before the second millennium BCE. And according to some stories, was founded by King Midas. Yes, the Golden Touch guy. But even before King Midas, some ancient sources, Pausanias, for those of you who are keeping track, say that it was even older than King Midas. So, make of that what you will. The takeaway is there's been some sort of human presence around Ankara for ages, but it really took off once Mustafa Kemal, later known as Ataturk, decided that the Turks needed a symbolic fresh start, and he just said, okay, we're moving the capital here.
Yeah, and, he basically declares war on the Entente powers from World War I, which really doesn't seem like it'd be a good idea because, Germany was a big help in that war. But, weirdly, he gets attacked, of course, immediately by France and Britain and Greece. They're trying to capture Ankara. They're trying to get him. They're trying to get his guys.
So you mean attacked like literally, like physically attacked, not just like attacked with words?
No. Guns and tanks and airplanes and things are coming for him and ships. But Turkey is pretty far from the Commonwealth and France, and these guys have just suffered very badly in the war, and they were probably happy to have it over. The Greeks, the Armenians, the Serbians, they're very committed because this is their turf and they want to fight this war.
Yeah, this is much closer. Yeah,
but
this is their neighborhood.
Exactly. But for England and France, it's not, it's not as easy to get troops out there, and there's some political problems of, the people of those countries being like, hey, I think we've lost enough guys in World War I. We're pretty much done with having dead Frenchmen and dead Englishmen. And Ataturk's able to hold Ankara against them and drive them back. And he's leading troops against the Greeks and the Armenians and the Serbians and these other Eastern European powers. And he's defeating them and is able to reunify Anatolia. And declare Turkish independence, basically, from these other countries, and basically say, we're not doing this treaty. They fight him, and he wins. And so he's not doing the treaty.
That's a W, yeah.
Now, there's a bit of a sticky thing we need to talk about here involving Ataturk. And we have to mention it, and I think it would be irresponsible not to. But one thing that is kind of a sticky question here is the involvement of Mustafa Kemal in what we know as the Armenian genocide, right? Which is a thing that is not talked about very much in Turkiye, but
because I think it's actually some sort of illegal to talk about it, or it has been illegal.
I think you're right.
There's a lot of pressure to not. There has been a lot of pressure to not talk about it, and I don't know exactly the details. But.
So it creates a bit of a tough thing for us to deal with here because, the majority of the atrocities that occurred, and we have a lot of physical evidence that really, really bad things happened to the people of Armenia at the hands of the Turks and the Young Turks, which was a movement Ataturk was part of. Although he, the more, I don't even know how to quantify this, but like the worst bits of it happened before he was even old enough to be, before he's not involved in any of this. He's not lining people up in the streets and shooting them, right? He's not doing that kind of stuff. I don't know. Talking about this is difficult, but
it is, But
so the greater part of the Armenian genocide happens before Ataturk's time. But where he gets tied in is some of the fighting here, right at the end of World War I, where he's trying to retake Turkey from these foreign powers that have overtaken it. In doing this, he takes some territory from the Greeks and the Armenians, and in the process of these fighting, civilians are killed, and these civilian killings get lumped in with the Armenian genocide. It's not a great look for Ataturk. But
no, it's not a great look. Whatever the reality and whatever the actual involvement, I agree, it's not a great look. Yeah.
So it's kind of a sticky thing where he gets lumped in there. It's hard, man, because the Armenians, they believe that he is part of it, right? Like, they really,
and I understand why.
Sure.
But I also understand why he's not.
I mean, he's not,
depending on how you look at it.
Right. He's not there for these things that are happening. There's one big city that gets taken, and the Greek and the Armenian quarter gets burned, and a lot of people die. It's horrible, and it's a tragedy, and it's a terrible thing that happened to these civilians. Civilians shouldn't be killed in war. But I think there's a difference between rounding up all of the Armenians in town and systematically executing them versus your army captures a town and a bunch of people die in the process. So I don't know how to talk about it.
Be that as it may, however you look at it, it was a great tragedy.
Yes.
And so this is a complication in the figure of Ataturk. Let's just acknowledge that that's a thing.
Yeah. Although, I mean, in my reading of him and my understanding of him at the time and later on, like, this really wasn't his. I don't see this as kind of the black mark that some people argue that it is, right? I don't really believe that he doesn't really strike me as the kind of person that.
It doesn't jive with some of his progressive and humanitarian moves later. Yeah,
it doesn't. And he, in later years, will do a lot of work to try to repair these bridges. Some people accept that more than others, but he does do a lot of work, and he is, it is the United Nations Year of Ataturk because he does spend a lot of time and energy later on in his career trying to, rebuild relations with the Armenians and the Greeks and other people that he had been at war with for all of the history of the Ottoman Empire.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
so that's kind of a somber note, but
let's move on.
Let's move on. And when all the dust has settled,
yes,
and Turkey is free from European domination, what do things look like? What are we up to?
Okay, so it's 1923 now, and Mustafa Kemal he's basically the George Washington of Turkey, right? He is, right? And he gets elected.
That's a good way of putting it,
He gets elected the first president of democratic Turkiye. Like, they overthrow the Sultan and they abolish the Sultanate. The last Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, walks out of the palace, and there's a photo of him getting in a car and driving away, and that's the end of the sultans. They're gone. They've been voted out, and now there's a democracy in Turkey. And Ataturk is selected the first president of Turkey, and he is at the time 42 years old. So he's, I don't know what, my age, I think, which is kind of depressing to think about.
No. Numbers are arbitrary.
That's fair.
Yeah.
So
maybe he's 42, like base 12 or something.
Well, he sets up a secular, non-religious affiliated democracy and spends the next decade trying to modernize that country through like 300 years of modernization, which he is able to do remarkably effectively. He institutes these sweeping legal changes, puts in mandatory education, abolishes laws that deny freedom and equality to women. And he does a lot of things to kind of bring the Ottoman Empire into, or now Turkiye, into the modern world.
In Ataturk's mind, in Mustafa Kemal's mind, a lot of what meant the modern world was European. The Ottoman Empire had been using the Arabic script, the Arabic alphabet, to write Turkish language documents, but Kemal changes this to the Latin script, so, the alphabet that we use to write English. And okay, you had to add a few letters with little dots over them because you had to represent Turkish pronunciation. But it's like, bam, okay, hey, you just need to learn a new alphabet. And he also, and I'm recording this, Ben, you and I are recording this a few days after we change from daylight savings time to standard time. And that's only 1 hour of time difference. But there were, in the early 20th century, I think maybe, 6 different ways of telling the day and year in Turkiye. Kemal says, okay, A, this is ridiculous. You need a higher degree in mathematics to figure out what day of the week it is. And also, hey, let's just streamline this and let's be all modern, which means, okay, yeah, it means European. So if you actually look up the term Rumi calendar, RUMI calendar, you will find images of a calendar page that has so many different ways of telling the date. And you might find April 25th actually corresponds to, I'm just making this up, May 8th. You've got the difference between the Gregorian and the Julian calendar. You've got the difference between the Islamic and the generally Christian calendar. And so Ataturk says, okay, I'm calling him Ataturk. I forget when exactly he gets the name Ataturk, but anyway, our guy, Mustafa Kemal, he cuts through the Gordian knot of calendars. And he says, okay, we're just going to do this European style. And he waves his magic wand or whatever whatever legislative or executive thing he has. So basically, anyone who has been telling time or telling the date by the Islamic calendar, which the year would have been 1300 something. Oh,
because even the years are different.
Yeah.
Right, the thing of the Earth is 5,000 years old or whatever, and the Muslims tell time by Muhammad, and we tell it by the Christians tell it by Jesus Christ. Oh wow, yeah, crazy.
Yeah. So you've got all of a sudden, bam, we're almost 600 years.
And we still have the Julian and the Gregorian calendars, the thing we were talking about earlier. It's how Russia was on a different calendar than England was.
Yeah.
So they're using all of that in Turkey at the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we have a hard enough time. We have a hard time coordinating podcast interviews with people in a different time zone, right?
Exactly.
I thought you were talking about Thursday.
Yeah. But at least we're in agreement about generally what month and year it is.
The year, yeah.
Yeah. And all of a sudden, bam, Mustafa Kemal says, okay, we're doing this European Gregorian style, which feels more modern to me. Or at least this is what all the other kids on the block are doing. So, okay. He's committed to this.
I mean, that's great, right? Because we were talking about the logistical problems of the Ottoman Empire getting troops to Gallipoli. And, this is a good example of that, right? We can't even agree on what year it is.
Yeah. And Ben, I think in some earlier episode, I think you said even getting a few people together for a D&D session is just complicated enough. Imagine, yeah.
We need to coordinate 75 trains to transport 3 corps of infantry to this location by this time.
Yeah. And if you look at these pages from the calendar before the reforms, you'll see, I don't know how many different scripts. You'll see the Latin alphabet in French. You'll see the Greek alphabet. You'll see the Cyrillic alphabet because you have some Bulgarians in the mix. You'll see the Hebrew alphabet. You'll see the Armenian alphabet. You'll see the Arabic script.
Oh, wow. Because that empire spans all of those places. So they have to kind of incorporate the calendars and languages and scripts of those people And so he's kind of like, all right, if we're not going to have the Ottoman Empire, if we're going to be this, we're going to be Turkey now, like, let's just do that. Let's pick one. We'll pick one thing, and it'll probably be, and he picked the Western version because that just makes it easier to integrate with France and England and Germany and all of those countries.
Yeah. And also integrating with various other countries and countries that he perceived as more modern. And also he had a whole movement towards being more secular because he perceived religious diversity as being, well, a source of, well, a lot of tension, shall we say. So Turkey became a secular democracy, emphasis on secular.
Which is another Western idea, right? The separation of church and state is, is the First Amendment, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. He wanted to reinforce the idea that Turkey was a secular society and not, a theocracy or whatever. So he got a hat law passed. A hat law? I hear you say? Hats? What do hats have to do with anything? Well, a lot of different groups had different attire and headgear that was associated with particular religions.
It's like gang colors, right? Like,
well, okay. I mean, that makes it sound adversarial, but maybe it's just like, okay, if you happen to be a particular religion, maybe you just happen to dress in a particular way because, like, I don't know, that's just like, well, okay, I don't know, maybe it is gang colors. I don't know. I feel like there's a whole sidebar on what religious identity actually means. Yeah, but
backwards hat and you like draw your sword.
Okay, yeah.
Backwards baseball cap. My arch enemy.
Yeah. And so he associated hats with brims as being more European and therefore more modern and secular because he didn't associate them with any particular religion. Now, there's another type of brimless hat, the fez, which was...
You see on the Shriners.
Okay, yeah. And it was... maybe it had Islamic connotations, and he was quite happy for people to continue being Muslims, but he didn't want to make this a visible, divisive signal or symbol in public. So in 1925, we have a hat law, and you're only allowed to wear hats with brims. You're not allowed to wear a fez.
Huh. But we have pictures of him wearing that kind of thing though too, right? So like in the old days, before he passed the hat law, because one of my favorite pictures of him, he's wearing this big fuzzy brimless hat where he looks like a steppe warrior. He looks like Genghis Khan.
Yeah.
But it was probably the hat that you have to wear as an officer of the Turkish army, right? But that's cool. Well, yeah, and so he was known. He came to power as a warrior and a revolutionary and a fighter, and then he kind of seizes power over Turkiye, and he's the new the president of Turkiye. He went to military academy, and he's been a warrior ever since, right? He's been fighting all over the world. But once he comes to power, he's kind of unique among this type of character because and George Washington's another good example of this, where he is actually like pretty chill as a leader. He doesn't lead like a conqueror. He goes out of his way to try to establish peace and good relations and trade rights with former enemies. He reaches out to Greece, the Balkans, Yugoslavia, Australia, Russia, the Commonwealth, people that he had literally been ordering men to stab with bayonets, not 10 years earlier. And he's traveling to their countries now and shaking hands with them and trying to build trade relations and trying to reunite, like bring Turkiye into the Western world, but in the process, kind of heal these wounds that have existed between these countries for centuries, millennia, right? We were talking about the Greeks. That's kind of wild. They still can't agree on whether it's called a gyro or a shawarma, but they're generally friendly to each other. Yeah. It's worth saying that the Armenians still hate Ataturk, of course. Generally speaking, he tried, but some bridges you just can't rebuild. But he actually ended up building a coalition of Eastern European countries that were trying to resist the fascist expansion from Germany and Italy. So we're between World War I and World War II now. Turkey is now no longer part of this Treaty of Versailles because that applies to the Ottoman Empire, and we're not the Ottoman Empire anymore. And, Hitler takes over in Germany, Mussolini takes over in Italy. They're trying to assert their dominance over Eastern Europe. And Ataturk is trying to present himself and Turkey as an alternative to that, trying to build this coalition of democracy for Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
So he starts mediating international disputes. He starts working for peace. He starts trying to build goodwill among his neighbors. And he's such a cool guy that they built a monument to him in the capital of Australia.
Wait, what?
Which right. So, I think it's a short list of people who have monuments to them built in countries that they fought against. I think that's a short list.
I think it's a short list. Yeah. Yeah.
Like, think of like noble adversaries from history, right? But like they didn't build a Hannibal statue in Rome, right? Like, even though he was a worthy adversary, Boudica, I think that Boudica burned London to the ground and they built a Boudica statue to her. But and Ataturk in Melbourne is about all I can come up with for building statues to the guy you fought against.
Yeah, that's a side quest for our listeners. Hey,
yeah.
Badass Nation, if you find yourself in a city with a town square with a statue to a person that the country has fought against, let us know.
Yeah. I mean, I think Ataturk is especially interesting in Australia because he didn't fight there.
Yeah.
Right. The Australians went to Turkey and fought him. He traveled to Australia and he gave speeches there. He went there.
But he gave a lot of speeches in a lot of places.
Right. But the battle wasn't there. Yeah. So I don't know. I think it's cool.
So the Australians apparently have a lot of respect for him. And the Turks themselves have respect and, I don't know, love, adulation.
I mean, he is the father of all Turks, right?
And in a more, I don't know, literal sense, he was the father of several children. He adopted a bunch of kids, I think 9 or 10. Oh. The government formally bestowed the title of Ataturk on him. Now, this was in 1934 while he was still alive. And as a Romanist, I'm a little weirded out by this because like in ancient Rome, if you get deified, it's something that happens after your death. But this is not ancient Rome. This is modern Turkey. Okay. This title actually shows up on his photo ID card, which is actually yet another one of his reforms. So he got another modernizing reform passed called the surname law. And all Turks had to take on a surname. So instead of being like, so-and-so, son of so-and-so, or so-and-so from whatever village, you actually had to take on a surname that could get passed down to your descendants, the way that Ben, you could pass down Thompson to your descendants or whatever. There were some restrictions on the types of surnames. They couldn't sound too Greek or too Armenian. Okay. And for reasons. And the surname that Mustafa Kemal had or chose or was suggested to him was Ataturk. And that means father of the Turks.
So his photo ID said Mustafa, perfection, father of all the Turks.
I mean, can you be more badass than that, So that just became his legal surname, The Turks elected him president 15 years in a row. And the only reason he didn't get elected a 16th time was because, he died. And I have not been to Turkey myself, but from what I gather, his picture's all over the place and, things are named after him. And I'm told by a colleague who has spent a lot of time in Turkey that, so Ben, earlier you compared him to George Washington. And I think there's kind of how there's like a George Washington slept here kind of thing?
Yeah.
So there's like a kind of a similar thing with Ataturk. And there's a cafe that serves a drink called boza, which is a lightly fermented Bulgar wheat drink, and sometimes contains cinnamon, sometimes contains chickpeas. The Janissaries used to drink it I get the sense that it might be like a little bit of a protein drink or something. So this drink is called boza. And there's a cafe where apparently Mustafa Kemal, aka Ataturk, would go to drink boza. And they have the cup, the very cup that he drank out of, enshrined in a little glass display case on the wall. So, Ataturk drank boza here.
I like it. We definitely have that here for George Washington and some other stuff, right? Like this is... Okay, so the Turks love Ataturk, clearly. They elect him president 15 times. He dies in 1938, just as, like a year before World War II begins. He's only 57 years old. He accomplishes all of these things before he's 60, which is just really amazing. And I really just can't, he was just some guy from some kind of, not huge city in Turkiye, and he goes to military academy. He becomes this war hero. He finds himself in the middle of the biggest battle of modern Turkish military history, wins it basically. Then they lose the war. He decides he's not going to accept that. He creates his own government out of nowhere, fights the entire rest of the world, wins, then rebuilds relations with all of the people he's been fighting this whole time, to the point where in 1981, the United Nations declared it the Ataturk Year of the World to celebrate the 100th anniversary of his birth. In the statement declaring this, the UN refers to him as, quote, the leader of the first struggle given against colonialism and imperialism. And they call him a remarkable promoter of the sense of understanding between peoples and durable peace between the nations of the world, that he worked all his life for the development of harmony and cooperation between peoples without distinction.
Okay, can I just intervene? I just want to say, I appreciate all of the shine that the UN is giving him. I do sort of wonder, was it really the first struggle given against colonial and imperialism in the history of the world? But that just setting aside. Maybe first in the sense of really important. Okay, so he was a...
Yeah, I mean, I think what Unitas would have something to say about that.
Anyway, but in 1981, the United Nations declares the Ataturk Year in the world, and
Yeah, and and that's just kind of and as you said, that's probably a pretty silly thing, right? But it's indicative of how he's been perceived in his life, right? Having it be declared the Ataturk Year of the World, right? It's cool and it's awesome, but I'm sure there was other things at play in 1981 that contributed to this, right? Yeah. But the fact that he is a character that is able to garner that type of support and respect is really cool. And it really, we have kind of, and I've kind of delved primarily into the military stuff. I focused more on the war hero aspect of Ataturk than on the, promoter of understanding and peace version of him that came after he won all these wars and tries to rebuild these bridges, which it's less dramatic of a story to tell, but it's arguably more important, right? Yeah. If you can prevent the war from happening and build peace and understanding and bring the world more towards being together and at peace and at harmony, then I think that's more important. And it's a thing that he really made an effort at doing after he took control. And I think that's great. One way that I'd like to, kind of to end this episode, one way I'd really like to kind of sum him up in that way, right? And so I think what I can do here is synthesize the two, the military hero Ataturk with the promoter of peace Ataturk. Yeah. And I think I can do it with a quote by him, right? I think I mentioned that there's a statue to him in the capital of Australia. And there was a ceremony that he performed after World War I was over, after the Turkish Independence War was over. He's the president. He's rebuilding these bridges. He invites Anzac, so Australia, New Zealand, and the Commonwealth, and some Gurkhas and all these people. He invites the Commonwealth troops, the families, parents, the veterans, the soldiers of this war, who were at Gallipoli fighting against him personally.
Yeah.
He invites them all to a dedication ceremony at Gallipoli. Come to Turkey, and we are going to build a statue here. We're going to build a monument to all of the brave men from every side, every country who fought and died on this battlefield, because it is, it was an important battle, and we need to kind of heal and rebuild these bridges.
Gesture.
And I want you to know that, it's a gesture of goodwill. And he gives this speech to the families of these soldiers who died on the battlefield here and are buried at Gallipoli, right? They didn't go home. They die on the beaches there, and they're buried there, and they're staying there. So Ataturk is talking to these people, and he says, "Those heroes that shed their blood and lost their lives, you are now lying in the soil of a friendly country. Therefore, rest in peace. There's no difference between the Johnnies and the Mehmeds to us, where they lay side by side here in this country of ours. You, the mothers who sent their sons from faraway countries, wipe away your tears. Your sons are now lying in our bosom and are at peace. After having lost their lives on this land, they have become our sons as well." And I think that really kind of says a lot to how he kind of viewed the world after this and rebuilt these bridges. And that's Ataturk, and I think that's really cool. And that's all the time we have for today, you guys. We hope you enjoyed it, and we hope you guys will like and subscribe and do all that stuff. So anyway, thank you so much for listening, and we will see you on the next one.
Stay badass.
Badass of the Week is an iHeartRadio podcast produced by High Five Content. Executive producers are Andrew Jacobs, me, Pat Larish, and my co-host, Ben Thompson. Writing is by me and Ben. Story editing is by Ian Jacobs, Brandon Phibbs. Mixing and music and sound design is by Jude Brewer. Special thanks to Noel Brown at iHeart. Badass of the Week is based on the website badassoftheweek.com, where you can read all sorts of stories about other badasses. If you want to reach out with questions, ideas, you can email us at badasspodcast@badassoftheweek.com. If you like the podcast, subscribe, follow, listen, and tell your friends and your enemies if you want, as we'll be back next week with another one. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.